March 5, 2017, the town of Narovlia, Belarus. Just last night, drunken shouts and laughter could be heard from one of the houses on Oktyabrskaya Street. The repeat offender Alexei Mikhalenya, a local criminal celebrity, was celebrating his return to freedom. This morning the street is quiet and empty. To Maxim Fateyev, who decided to visit his relatives Viktor and Raisa Fateyev, it seems even too empty and quiet. As if something bad has happened and now everything around is holding its breath, waiting. Maxim stops his bicycle by the gate and enters the yard, calling for his aunt and uncle, but no one answers him. In the bright spring sunlight, bloody tracks are clearly visible on the snow-covered porch, leading around the house. The tracks lead Maxim Fateyev to the basement, where the motionless body of his aunt lies face down. When Maxim turns her over, he can't help but scream. Instead of a face, the dead woman has a bloody mess of flesh and bone. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's censorship, I can't show some documentary materials, so I'll leave them in the Telegram channel Strashnodi. Go ahead, subscribe and watch. The link is under the video. As Maxim recovers from the shock and calls the police across the street, Alexei Mikhalenya quickly packs a suitcase. He needs to escape, to hide, before they come for him. If they catch him, he'll end up back in prison. They give the death penalty for such crimes, and he is very afraid of the death penalty. The knock on the door sounds unexpectedly loud, and Mikhalenya freezes. Alexei Mikhalenya was born in the Yelsk district of the Gomel region in 1984. He had a medical diagnosis of mild intellectual disability and studied at a boarding school. Even as a child, Lesha had a difficult character. He was rude to elders, quick-tempered, and easily got into fights with his peers. On top of everything else, the boy was prone to stealing and took anything he could get his hands on. School supplies, classmates' belongings, and even went through teachers' bags. Petty thefts were a common thing for him, and when caught, Lesha showed no remorse. Only his parents worried and blushed. Many times Alexei Mikhalenya ran away from the boarding school simply because he was bored there. Studying wasn't interesting and sitting at a desk wasn't either. Alexei was much more attracted to the adult world, where you could do whatever you wanted. As an adult, Mikhalenya quickly became addicted to alcohol. Not wanting to study or work for 17 years, the 20-year-old guy didn't want to do anything anywhere, so he often begged, or rather extorted money for alcohol from his elderly neighbors. Outspoken and physically strong, Mikhalenya often got into arguments with his neighbors, threatened them, and they were afraid that the hot-tempered guy would attack them with his fists. The elderly people preferred to give him money. Alexei believed that this was how it should be. Mikhalenya had a few friends in Narovlia, also teenagers wasting their lives and drinking alcohol from a young age. Gathering in groups, they often spent evenings at someone's house or out on the street, drinking alcohol, swearing, and scaring passers-by. In October 2002, during another drinking session, Mikhalenya and his friends ran out of vodka and money, so they decided to break into an elderly acquaintance's house. They broke a window, got inside, took the money, and quickly ran away. The elderly man didn't want to deal with the drunk teenagers at night, but the next day he decided to have a serious talk with them. But Mikhalenya was still drunk. As soon as the man threatened to tell the boy's father, an argument broke out. Soon Mikhalenya grabbed a rolling pin and hit his neighbor. When the elderly man doubled over in pain and groaned, Alexei thought the lesson had been learned. Throwing the rolling pin aside, he left. The pensioner didn't go to the police to complain. Maybe he was afraid, or maybe for other reasons. Be that as it may, convinced of their own impunity, Mikhalenya and one of his older friends decided to rob other elderly neighbors at night. Breaking the windows, they climbed into the house and started rummaging through the cabinets. The noise woke up the elderly couple who owned the house. The man tried to reason with the teenagers, but they were drunk and wouldn't listen. A fight broke out. Mikhalenya hit the pensioner on the head with a shovel, and when he fell, started beating him with his fists and feet. They finished off the unfortunate man with a shiv made from a welding electrode. The house owner met the same fate. After making sure that the unnecessary witnesses to the crime were dead, Mikhalenya and his companions started searching the old man's house for money, but they found nothing. Taking some food and half a bottle of wine, the failed robbers went home, empty-handed. They returned to the scene of the crime the very next day to cover their tracks. They climbed in through the window just like they did at night, carefully removing the glass. The criminals wiped the floor and walls with a wet rag to wash away the blood splatters. They cleaned up to hide any signs of a struggle. The bodies still lying on the floor, Mikhalenya and his companion carefully wrapped in a blanket, loaded onto a metal cart and took them to the Pripyat River. The criminals picked a quiet, deserted spot and tied ceramic drainage pipes to the corpses' legs to keep the bodies from floating. After that, both bodies were taken by boat to the middle of the river and thrown into the water. After returning home, the friends agreed to lay low for a while and see what would happen. No one was tormented by remorse. As it turned out, committing a crime and not getting caught was not difficult at all. After some time had passed and the initial fear of being exposed had subsided, Mikhalenya and his friend visited the house of a lonely woman in their hometown of Narovlia. She didn't have any money either, so the robbers had to take whatever they could find, a mirror and stereo headphones. After that, Mikhalenya's gang moved to the Mezar district, where they robbed and beat a man they happened to meet in the forest. To finish off the victim, Mikhalenya stabbed the 67-year-old man in the neck with a knife. They threw the dying man into a ravine and covered him with branches. Later, the man was found, but they couldn't save him. He died in the hospital a few days later. In the same Mezar district, Mikhalenya committed another attack, this time on a store. The saleswoman couldn't handle two tall and strong guys. Mikhalenya and his accomplice took money from the register, but it was a small amount. Angry, the guys started beating the woman, and passing hunters saw this. The men started shooting into the air, hoping to scare the criminals. Mikhalenya and his accomplice took off running. But this time, luck turned against the criminals. The hunters' dogs, which they immediately set on the trail, found them. The injured woman's relative chased the fleeing men on a motorcycle, caught up, fired into the air, and ordered them to stop. Completely unknown, frightened, Mikhalenya and his friends surrendered and allowed themselves to be taken to the police. While Mikhalenya's gang was running wild, in the neighboring district, the relatives of the deceased Narovlia pensioners became alarmed. The man and woman stopped answering calls, and no one was opening the door. It seemed as if the elderly people had simply disappeared without a trace, as if they had vanished into thin air. A search was announced, and investigators and forensic experts visited the house. At the crime scene, they discovered traces of blood. Mikhalenya and his friends hadn't noticed them while cleaning up. There was blood on the wallpaper, on the furniture, and also on the shovel and the axe handle, which were leaning against the wall. Forensic tests showed the blood was from a woman and a man. Without a DNA test, it was impossible to determine exactly whose blood it was, but the investigators logically assumed it was the blood of the homeowners. A crime occurred. They will likely be searching for bodies, not survivors. Who attacked the elderly couple and why? Investigators started questioning the missing couple's acquaintances. Soon, a circle of people was identified with whom the retirees had bad or tense relationships. Mikhalenya, who often extorted money from the couple for a bottle of vodka, also became one of the suspects. He had already been detained for robbery, so they didn't have to look for him. The criminal didn't deny it for long and soon told what had happened. A search team for the bodies was immediately organized. Divers searched the bottom of the Pripyat River from the place where the bodies were thrown into the water and downstream. They were only able to find a red blanket, in which, according to Mikhaleny, one of the bodies had been wrapped. They also searched for bodies on land. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood found in the house belonged to the missing pensioners. The blood on the axe handle and the shovel was also theirs. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed and further examinations conducted. During the investigation, 9 more serious crimes committed in neighboring Snorovlia and districts were solved. Several people ended up in the dock, including Alexei Mikhaleny. His 19-year-old partner was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Mikhaleny himself and another member of the group, who was also a minor, each received 12 years in prison. That was the maximum sentence that could be given to minors. Alexei Mikhaleny went to prison for the first time, while he and his accomplices were already serving sentences. When the remains of 2 people were discovered on the banks of the Pripyat River, forensic analysis confirmed that these were the bodies of the missing pensioners. So Mikhaleny and his accomplices were telling the truth. Alexei Mikhaleny was released from prison in 2014, having been granted amnesty. Life in prison was tough for Mikhaleny. His unruly temper made itself known. He often got into altercations with his cellmates. He was eagerly awaiting his freedom, but as it turned out, it wasn't to start a new life. Alexei Mikhaleny was already a 30-year-old man when he got out of prison. By that time, his mother had passed away, and his father had become almost disabled due to illness. Kadim Mikhalenya hoped that his son would help him around the house, maybe think about getting a job and start a family. But Alexei was still not interested in any of that. He quickly went back to his old habits and returned to drinking and drunken fights. He started dating a girl, but he wasn't thinking about marriage. He was just having a good time. Very soon, Mikhaleny ended up back in prison. He committed a theft. This time, his sentence was short, just a year and a half. On February 28, 2016, Alexei Mikhalenya, already a seasoned repeat offender, returned home once again. He celebrated his return as usual with friends and the girl who had waited for him to get out of prison. The celebration lasted until March 4. That day, Arkady, Alexei's father, decided he needed a haircut. In the Mikhaleny house, there had never been any scissors, so Arkady sent his son to the neighbor, telling him to come back quickly. Alexei Mikhalenya came back home with someone else's blood on his hands. The neighbor didn't have scissors. She either gave them away or didn't want to find them. Mikhalenya, also drunk, could have gone home when he saw Alexei was drunk, but the idea was stuck in his mind. I need a haircut, I need scissors, I'll get you no matter what. In the house next door lived the Fateyev siblings, retirees. Viktor was 61, Raisa was 59. The Fateyevs had recently moved to Narovlia and were renovating their house. Viktor and Raisa were peaceful, non-confrontational, did not drink, and were well respected in the village. Arkady and Mikhalenya knew him well and often visited him, offering their help. He decided to go to them for assistance. That night, his drunken son Mikhalenya made his way to the Fateyevs and started banging on their door. Viktor, who opened the door, instantly recognized the neighbor's son, recently released from prison and clearly drunk. He'd surely heard about Alexei's wild temper, to die. The man started a conversation with Mikhalenya, began asking about his life, hoping the guy would calm down and leave. He even offered him a smoke, later the cigarette butt they shared together. The criminal and his victim will be key evidence in this case. It's truly unknown what the elderly man said or did to anger the drunken Alexei so much. He attacked the man first with his fists, then grabbed a stick. Hearing the noise and screams, Viktor's sister Raisa ran out. Alexei hit her with the stick, making her fall to the ground, then turned his attention back to Viktor Koykak. Pushing Mikhalenya away from him, Viktor rushed to the gate to call for help and summon the police. Alexei understood that if the pensioner made it, he would end up in prison again. Suddenly, car headlights flashed by on the road near the house. Viktor shouted hoarsely and waved his arms, and Alexei, realizing that he couldn't hesitate any longer, ran after the pensioner. Catching up with Viktor at the gate, he grabbed him and punched him twice in the solar plexus. Viktor groaned, doubled over, and fell. Mikhaleny had barely caught his breath when he heard a groan coming from the house. Raisa, who had gotten to her feet, also tried to escape, heading toward the gardens. Gripping the stick more comfortably, Mikhalenya rushed after her. A blow, another blow to the head. He could only feel the bones crunching under the stick. There were no emotions at that moment. For a while, the criminal darted between the man and woman as they desperately tried to save themselves. And then, completely enraged, he rushed over to Viktor, who had lost consciousness, and started beating him with a stick until he stopped moaning. When the man finally breathed his last, Mikhalenya was breathing heavily. And yet he heard Raisa, bloodied with a broken head, trying to get up again. The woman barely managed to get to her feet when the criminal grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her against the wall. Raisa crashed into the windowsill, groaned, and slid down the wall from the windowsill to the floor. Long nails scattered next to her. The mind of drunken Alexei fixated on those nails. Turning the half-conscious and already wheezing Raisa onto her back, Mikhalenya grabbed a long nail. 1, 2, and there was a nail in each of the woman's eye sockets. Mikhalenya carefully pushed them in as far as possible, right up to the head, feeling the tip go through the bone. A lot. By the time he finished, the woman was dead. The examination later found Viktor Mikhalenya inflicted over 20 blows and Raisa 30. Almost all of them were to the victims' heads. The bodies had to be disposed of, and as soon as possible, Alexei understood father was surely already starting to worry. Without thinking long, he threw Raisa's body into the basement. The criminal dragged Viktor's body to the garden and left it there. There was no time to get rid of the weapon or cover up the traces. They waited for Priyacha at home. Mikhalenya trudged in with bloodied hands. When he came in, he immediately washed and dried his hands with a towel. All night, Mikhalenya tossed and turned in bed, and in the morning he decided to flee to Russia, supposedly to find work, since he wasn't having any luck finding a job here. But he didn't make it in time. Already the next day, on March 5th, the Fateyev's nephew Maxim found Raisa's body in the basement by following the bloody trail. They called the police. The service dog found Viktor's body as well, with his face mutilated and smashed with a stick. Alexei Mikhalenya became the first suspect. He had a conviction for a similar double crime, had recently returned from prison, and lived next to the victims. And the method of the old and new crimes was definitely similar. The investigators went to Mikhalenya's home, and just in time he was packing his things. "I want to go to Russia to work," he said, when they asked him where he was going. "You'll go," the investigators agreed, "but first come with us." Mikhalenya realized he was caught. On the very day he was detained, Alexei wrote a full confession in which he called himself the one who took the lives of the Fateyev siblings. However, according to his version, everything happened quite differently. Yes, he is guilty of the deaths of Viktor and Raisa Fateyev, but the man attacked him? Mikhalenya himself insisted that he barely had time to knock on the door and ask about the scissors when Viktor rushed out and attacked him with his fists. Raisa joined in later with a stick, brother and sister against poor Mikhalenya, until he finally broke free and ran to the gate. Viktor hurried after him, intent on telling Alexei's father and calling the police. Alexei couldn't allow that. He had just been released, he was drunk, and the police would surely take him away in no time. He attacked Viktor at the gate to protect himself, Mikhalenya insisted, and he certainly didn't intend to take his life. As for Raisa, she was swinging her stick like a madwoman. He had to work hard to calm her down. Only nails driven into her eyes helped. Mikhalenya spoke about the nails almost with pleasure. The investigators watched the criminal almost change as he relived that night, savoring and repeating the bloody details. During the search of Mikhalenya's house, blood-stained clothes and towels were also found. This became additional evidence of his guilt. The trial took place in 2017. Alexei Mikhalenya was charged under a serious article, causing the death of 2 or more people, committed with particular cruelty by a person who had previously committed a serious crime. A forensic psychiatric examination confirmed that despite mild intellectual disability, Mikhalenya was sane at the time of the crime and understood the nature of his actions. Alcohol intoxication was also seen as an aggravating factor. Mikhalenya appeared indifferent and detached in court. He was sentenced to the highest form of punishment, the death penalty. In addition, he was ordered to pay compensation for moral damages to the victims. As of today, the death penalty has been abolished or is under a moratorium in almost all Commonwealth of independent states and European countries. Among European countries, the only country where this type of punishment is still applied is Belarus. Death is a terrible punishment for any criminal, whether a repeat offender or a first-time inmate. However, Alexei Mikhalenya didn't seem surprised or scared by the possibility of ending up in the execution room with a bullet to the back of his head after such a sentence. He calmly accepted the sentence and requested the death penalty not be changed to life imprisonment. According to him, he deserved the execution. "I can't explain to myself why I did it," he said at the end of his final statement. Mikhalenya's death sentence was the first one handed down in Belarus in 2017. Later, the death penalty was also handed down to 2 others, the notorious black realtors from Mogilev, Igor Gershankov and Semyon Berezhnov. By the way, there is a video about these realtors on the channel, be sure to check it out. Soon after the trial, Mikhalenya felt that he wasn't ready to die. He was only 33, and even though he had spent half his life in prison, he didn't want to lose it completely. He filed an appeal, and in June 2017 his complaint was reviewed by the Supreme Court of the country. This time, Mikhalenya no longer tried to appear indifferent. He said that he deeply regretted the crime he had committed and asked the victims for forgiveness. "I am ready to give my life to bring your loved ones back," he said, and then began to recount the circumstances of the crime in such detail that the judge had to interrupt him. "Your Honor, I feel disgusted, ashamed, and terrified. Please let me live, even in confinement," the criminal concluded. In his appeal, Mikhalenya drew attention to circumstances that were overlooked or not taken into account by the court of first instance. For example, he pointed out that he blew into the breathalyzer twice and that the first result was neutral, but only the second result, which showed a high level of alcohol in the breath, was included in the case. In addition, the forensic examination found bruises, abrasions, and signs of a fight with the Fateyevs on Mikhalenya's body. However, the court did not take this into account either, and the expert was not called to the courtroom. The Supreme Court upheld the sentence, so in early 2018 Mikhalenya still faced the death penalty. Surely someone had already told him how it would happen. Surely Mikhalenya had played this scenario over in his head many times. One day the firing squad will come for him. They will blindfold him and lead him into a special room where he will be ordered to kneel. When he, frozen with fear, obeys this order, they will press the barrel of a pistol to the back of his head and then a shot and oblivion. Terrified of dying, Alexei begged his father to save him. And in February 2018, Arkady Mikhalenya submitted an appeal to the United Nations Human Rights Committee. In response, the committee asked the Belarusian authorities to postpone the execution of the sentence until the complaint was reviewed. However, on the night of May 15th to 16th, they still came for Alexei Mikhalenya. He was taken out of the pre-trial detention cell and he never returned. The sentence was carried out. The United Nations Human Rights Committee published its decision on Mikhalenya's appeal only in 2021. The decision stated that Alexei Mikhalenya was sentenced to death as a result of an unfair trial. 3 years too late. Subtitles by Dima Torzok.